Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the DIY Homebuyer Podcast. This is a show that's all about empowering homebuyers to purchase a home without needing to hire a costly buyer's agent, because one, it can save you significant money, but two, I just believe that taking control of big decisions in life is a really good thing for you, as well as that an educated consumer is the best kind of consumer. And so trying to tear down some of the gatekeeping that's been happening in the real estate industry for many, many years now and empower home buyers. And I am so glad to have our guest, Wendy, who has been doing this far longer than I have, doing this as in being able to advocate for consumers. Wendy has an amazing story of where when she was going to sell her home several years ago, she was looking for a non-traditional way to do that and to not be rushed into it. She started a platform called Selling Later. As she built that out, she got to take a look behind the curtain as to what was going on in the real estate industry. There was definitely some things that grossed her out. And so then she was really able to pivot into consumer advocacy. I can't wait to hear about so many of the things that Wendy saw. But Wendy, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You summarized that so much better than the word jumble that I gave you before. So good job. Good marketing skills.
Hey, thanks. Well, that's good. It means that we are off to a good start. And I mean, I did tease the story, right? But I would love for you to fill in some more details, both of how you started Selling Later and just kind of what the spirit behind that was, and then what you started to see in the real estate industry.
Yeah. So originally we were building a home and we had a townhouse to sell. And we knew 7 months ahead when we were going to sell and we couldn't do anything. Right. So you just kind of sit there and you wait. And I was like, man, why isn't there somewhere where I can tell people hey, I'm going to sell in March of next year. Let me know if you're interested. I'll get in touch with you when we're ready. And it just didn't exist. And so for years, I stewed. I was like, I can't make a real estate platform. I'm not doing it. So we ended up going the traditional way. And then I forget what it was. It was a book or something that was just do it. It was just one of those light bulb moments of just do it, be afraid, doesn't matter, just build it. And so I did. And right after I launched, I got invited to Inman. And keep in mind, I was just this frustrated consumer that knew the issues I had. And I stood on stage at Inman and told the whole crowd how everyone should know when homes are selling and it shouldn't be hidden and everyone should have access to this information. And of course, it was crickets, right? Because I now know at the time that this industry doesn't really want that available to consumers, right? That's part of the system. Right. And so I got off that stage and people started to come up to me and say, oh my God, you can make so much money if you just did referral fees. And I looked at them and said, it was the head of Boomtown at the time, who's the major lead generation company.
Right.
I was like, what's a referral fee? I had no idea. And for those that don't know, it's when someone will connect you in an agent and basically get 30, 40, 25% of the commission because they passed your information along, which is how Zillow makes most of their money, at least half of their money. They claim it's less than that, but I don't know if I agree with that. So I thought about it and I was like, all right, I'm missing a lot of pieces here. I need to see what's going on. So I ended up the next year networking with the big companies, joining the real estate groups that have all the big VC funded companies and all the people that run it. And every time I met one of them, it was just that gut feeling I don't belong here. I don't like what they're saying. I don't like what they're doing. None of them are really talking about the consumer. They're just talking about money. Yeah. And so every year, I just networked more, learned more, and ended up in these awesome consumer advocacy groups with people that now I work with on a daily basis. Talk to Stephen Brobeck all the time. I work with Doug Miller constantly. I help him with his nonprofit. And those are some of the most influential people now that have been involved in the NAR settlement and the lawsuit. And so, I don't know, it's a very weird path. I don't know how I got here. I enjoy it. I went through a business accelerator group to figure out, how do I solve all these problems? There's so many people picking in the pocket of commissions and mortgages and, how do you help better protect consumers? And so it's just been a 5-year long road of learning, educating, trying things, putting out new programs. I must be insane because I'm still doing it. I don't know. I wish I had like a really cool answer for you as to like how I got here, but it's just a weird path that I landed on, and it feels good in my gut what I'm doing and how I'm helping. So it just feels like it's right.
Yeah, well, I think that is a really cool answer. So I
Yeah.
love that you just kind of kept following one step after the other. I also think it's really speaks to your character that you're in a lot of these rooms where people are talking about how they can make as much money as possible, and instead of you selling out to that, which would have probably been the easy thing to do, to just be like, all right, there is an opportunity for me to make money here.
Right,
Screw the
right,
consumer. That you really did go with your gut all of those years of that, like, yeah, this could be a way of profiting, but it's not right. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem right. It seems like we're profiting at the expense of other people versus profiting because of the value that we're providing to
right.
the marketplace, which is, one of the main things that I've seen and why I'm making the shift from being an agent to doing what I'm doing now. Did you ever get your real estate license, or has everything that you've learned about real
No,
estate?
actually went against it.
Okay.
Because my vision and my goal is to get people educated to the point where they can make their own decision on how they
Yeah.
choose to sell or buy. I don't want to be the person to tell you what you should do, but I want you to understand how the industry got to where it is, and why they can make you feel like you need to do this, or why everything's pushing you in this direction. And really, it's maybe not a great benefit to you, but it benefits these other companies, and understanding that part of it. And quite honestly, I was afraid if I really got my license and dived into it, that like I didn't want to end up being grouped with everybody
Mhm.
else. So
Mhm.
there's just an awesome group of consumer advocates on the outside, and
Yeah.
we all talk and we all connect. And the more I feel like I get into the industry, the more I'm afraid that I'll lose that outsider perspective. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Um, and it's funny. I think about that when I went to Inman that night. There was some huge like Zillow party, and they're like, "Oh, you should come." And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm sorry, I have to leave. I have to go to like I think I had a red eye because I was going to like the Lion King the next day with my kids." And I
Nice.
still think about that to this day. Like I'm pretty sure my gut and my character would have still led me here, but like if I had met some of those bigger influential people in real estate, I don't know if I would have learned how bad it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So every door that closes, a different one opens, and here I am now at some weird path down the road.
Yeah.
Um, that yeah, another long answer to your question there, of course.
No, it's perfect. So you mentioned just the history and how we got to the NAR lawsuit and settlement, and I would like to talk about that with you. Just some of the things that preceded the settlement, specifically from the buyer perspective. And I don't the whole idea of buyer agency is. It's kind of weird when you think about it. Like I had an interview with a guy in the UK where 99.9% of all transactions, the buyer is unrepresented. And even in America, pretty much every other purchase we make, there's no such thing as a buyer's agent. You work directly with the salesperson representing the seller.
Mhm.
And so maybe for those that are unfamiliar, can you talk to where this concept of buyer agency even came from?
Yeah. So, originally it was more like the European, where the buyer's agent was actually not representing the buyer. And then what happened was there were a ton of lawsuits that came out. And so NAR will say that home buyers really wanted this fiduciary buyer agency. But if you read Rob Hahn, he has a great article about this. And he's like, it was just as much about brokerages being sued all the time because the buyer felt misled and the brokerage not wanting to be sued anymore, as much as it was about a buyer requesting their own agency. The problem is when buyer agency came out, NAR took a course, or not necessarily NAR, but like the whole industry pushed it to consumers as like this free service, right? never
Mm-hmm.
really explaining to consumers the idea of buyer agency, right? Like that's supposed to be like a very like fiduciary relationship where they look out for your best interest. But that was never really explained. And it was always like, use a buyer agent, it's free. And so I
Yeah.
think the problem we're running into right now is if buyer agency was rolled out as like something similar to hiring a lawyer, right? And like massive skill sets, and it would be a much different story. But buyer agency was pushed out as a free thing. Why not use it? So I think there's a lot of miseducation about, what a buyer agent can do. But there's also way too many real estate agents who are not held accountable. And so you really have no idea what kind of agent you get until you start working with them. And that can turn out great or it can be horrible.
Right.
It's just, the true fiduciary position hasn't acted that way. It may now with the NAR settlement, but then in the past, I don't think consumers ever realized what a buyer agent was supposed to do.
Yeah. And let's talk about the NAR settlement. So buyers agents were pitched as this free service. And it is interesting there, like that piece that you mentioned, where it wasn't exactly something that the buyer, the consumer was asking for. It was more something that brokerages and NAR came up with to cover their own butts. And then they're like, but isn't this nice to the consumer?
Yeah. I mean, there's a piece to someone that, if you want representation, use one, sure.
Yeah.
But you can't take that whole story that like buyers requested it because everyone was suing. Because again, if you read Rob's article, he plays it out like they were just getting sued over and over again because the buyer felt screwed over by the agent that was supposed to be representing them. So that's the part of like I talk about history and education that consumers are a lot of times told one thing, but that's really only half the story. They NAR really tries to keep their like flawless vision and like everyone to think they're amazing.
Right.
But like if you look at past history, even how maybe NAR treated people of like any minority at this point, and redlining and their participation in that, like they're not a flawless organization. And they don't have the best history. So I just think it's important for consumers to kind of understand that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so in the lawsuit against NAR, can you just kind of summarize and describe what in that lawsuit had to do with buyer agency and both what the charges were and some of the outcomes from that lawsuit?
Right. So, I'm going to use the word steering. And I just got into this big Twitter battle with someone yesterday. So steering in real estate, they look at that as someone having to avoid neighborhoods based on like who lives there or crime rates or like steering based on fair housing. Yeah. But on the legal term, if you look at all of the lawsuits and if you even look at what the DOJ, they talk about steering as in like avoiding certain homes based on commission. And the DOJ has been after NAR for years for that. This isn't anything new. But with this lawsuit, it is actually a private lawsuit. The Department of Justice isn't involved in the NAR settlement. They can sure contribute if they like it or don't like it, which I think until middle of November, end of November, they have to make comments before the settlement's just like completely approved and things get rolling. But this private settlement was brought up by Doug Miller and originally Cohen Milstein. So that was the Merrill case. But the Sitzer case is the one that went to trial. And so the Merrill case was filed. And then the Sitzer case was also filed based on what the Merrill case was doing. But Sitzer made it to trial first, right? And so when they went to trial, it was in a public opinion court, right? So they had a jury. Most of them were people who have never bought or sold before, which I think is important because then they're not skewed, right? Like they're learning how things work fresh. They're not basing it on their experience because I think it could be biased. And the point of the case was to say the way that commissions are structured. And at that point, some agents, not all, were basically keeping the buy side commissions inflated by, sharing their commission, almost setting it. So they were setting commission for someone on the opposite side. So honestly, like a competitor or someone else that they're not in business with. So another business. And then the idea was that some of these companies were pressuring sellers that if they don't offer a certain amount, no one will come see your home. So I think, at least from the Department of Justice viewpoint, their biggest concern is about steering that whole, if you don't offer, no one's going to come see your home.
Right.
But with this lawsuit, because it's a private settlement, they were only limited to so much they could argue with when it came to the settlement. And part of the reason why now you have to have an agreement, it doesn't have to be exclusive with an agent, but part of the reason you have to do that upfront is because the agent needs to tell you what their fee is, and they want buyers to be encouraged to negotiate that fee ahead of time. Because in a lot of states, nobody was doing that. Even if an agreement needed to be signed at some point, all those commissions that were being offered were publicly listed. So agents could be like, oh, they're offering 3%. Sweet. I'm just going to write 3% in our agreement. Can you sign this, please? Instead of like actually negotiating and having that conversation with the buyer about what they should charge. So again, and we told buyers for years that agent services are free. So here we are now, and buyers might feel overwhelmed, but I just want them to understand commissions weren't really being negotiated on the buy side. They were being set by like the listing side. And now it's really a fair game now for you to negotiate if you decide to use an agent and do that ahead of time. And that the best part about this is that whatever is written in your agreement, your agent is not supposed to make more than that. Your realtor, I'm sorry. Anyone that's a realtor, this applies to. So say I made an agreement with my realtor and they're going to charge me like 2% to help me buy a home. If for some reason the seller was offering more than that, your agent can't take it. So you could give it back to the seller, and that makes your deal look even better, right? If you're taking less than what they suggest.
Right.
That's a really long answer. It's a very complex.
It is.
It's very, very complex, but I just want people to understand it's not about removing buyer's agents altogether. It's about actually putting buyer agent commission into the free market to actually compete. Because in the past, it wasn't a free market for buyer agency commission. And now it is. And the more that you negotiate with that agent, the better your offer looks if you're asking for less to be covered than another buyer who didn't negotiate.
I think that's helpful. And maybe just to summarize, and you can correct me anywhere that you feel like I'm getting this wrong or misrepresenting it. But part of the issue on the buyer side related to the settlement was that if you had two people that were listing their home, you had some listing agents that were pressuring the seller to offer 3%, and maybe another seller was saying, I'm only going to offer a buyer agent 2%. And now the buyer's agents have a personal motivation to steer their clients towards the seller that's offering 3%, even if the other home that only is offering 2% is a better home and a better deal for the buyer. So that's one of the main issues, and that buyers may be unaware of that prior to the settlement because they weren't really aware of what their agent was getting paid or how they're.
It didn't have to be discussed then, right?
Yeah.
And because at that time, buyer commission was posted online, it was actually, what's interesting is people should know that buyer agent commission has been on the MLS for years. But up until the DOJ got involved, I think it was like 2022, they were actually getting websites to start making that public. And so if you think about it, for how many years buyers didn't even have access to know what that number was, but the agent did. And the problem, even after those became public, there was a section in the MLS for private remarks where agents or especially builders could say, hey, if you get this house sold within the next 3 months, I'll give you an extra $5,000. And most of the buyer agreement contracts that were out there, because most of them, except for a few states, were written by realtor associations and MLSs, basically said your agent expects to make 2.5%, but if the seller's offering more, they get to keep that too. And so probably one of the best things that comes out of this settlement is a lot of those contracts that were incredibly anti-consumer just got ripped to shreds and rewritten. So there, you're going to hear like, oh, poor buyers, but there has been some really good things that have come out of this. One,
Right.
you have a better chance to negotiate your commissions. Two, you're not getting contracts that are completely one-sided. They're still not perfect. But some of them, like EXP, has done a world of difference in making it more consumer friendly and understandable. It's interesting, depending on the media you read. You might think that this whole settlement is awful. You might think it's great. But there have been some really good things that have happened out of this settlement. So I just encourage buyers to really pay attention to what you're reading when you sign something, and to really negotiate that commission, because it can make your offer look 10 times better than another one.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that buyers are realizing and waking up to for the first time is, as they're having those conversations with buyers agents about the contract or the agreement, is that it's like, if they're shopping for a $700,000 home and the agent's asking for 3%, that's $21,000, even at 2%, right? Like 14 grand. And I think consumers are asking, okay, well, even if we can negotiate that in for the seller to pay it, is the work that this buyer agent is doing for me worth $14,000 to $21,000? And of course, like, that's going to be a personal question that everybody's got to answer for themselves. So I won't ask you to like opine as to whether or not that the agent is worth it. But I think that because it's so expensive, it's getting buyers to ask the question of like, can I do this without an agent?
Right.
And I would love for you to speak to that, like what you've seen in the marketplace. Are there people that are successfully representing themselves? What are some of the pitfalls there that folks should perhaps be aware of?
Yeah. I think this industry has never been really kind to DIY buyers. And quite frankly, this industry is not kind to any company that goes against that traditional model of like offering this percent and this percent. Like I think it was, oh gosh, I'm going to have to look up the name for you, but I know one of them was Rex, right? And they were listing homes for a flat fee. They weren't offering buyer agent commission, which I would love to get back to that at some point to explain to buyers about that. And agents were calling and being like, what do you mean you're not going to pay me anything? And then they would just hang up, and, here comes the steering again.
Right.
So, that's why I say like the free market now, because slowly sellers aren't going to be putting a number out there. And then you can just ask them to cover certain costs within your offer. And so if you have an educated DIY buyer who's going in and only asking for 1% concessions to cover some of their closing costs and their attorney fees, like that's a really good offer compared to someone coming in and asking for 3%. And it's fair for consumers to question why it's 2.5%, why it's 3%, regardless of how much experience your agent has, how many deals they've closed. There's a multitude of things that don't really add up when everyone's charging a very similar price. And again, if it takes you 3 tours and 1 offer and you're done, is that worth the 3%? But at the same point, if you take 20 tours and have to write 4 offers, and then like maybe it's different that way.
Right.
It's just it's stayed how it has for so long that it's going to take a little bit, I think, for people to get really educated from a DIY perspective, but it's definitely possible. I just think you need to make sure you're getting your information from the right sources. And when you go up to that listing agent, you better make sure you show them that like what you're doing, because DIY buyers, definitely some listing agents do not treat them kindly, just as some agents don't treat non-traditional selling approaches kindly. And I'm going to look up that one company for you, because at one point realtors were like throwing bricks at their windows. And yeah, it's even Redfin. If you look up the original history of Redfin, you will see that Redfin actually made a bad agent wall. It was a whole page dedicated to agents that treated them like, can I swear on here? Can we
Of
swear? Do
course
we
we
know
can.
swear?
Yeah.
So it was dedicated to agents that treated the almost DIY buyers, because that's what Redfin started as, like kind of an assistant, treated their
Yeah.
buyers like shit. But it
Yeah.
backfired because agents were so proud to have treated Redfin because they were different that people were applying to be on this wall on Redfin's page. Um, and now, like, I like Redfin's values and morals, but they're pretty much a brokerage like everyone else now because, pressure. I don't know, and when you take a lot of VC money, these companies all end up just doing anything possible to make money, unfortunately.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. They've got more allegiances to their shareholders than they do to the consumer themselves. Right. So
exactly.
But I think that's some really helpful insight. And in terms of the DIY home buyer, and I do love the emphasis on how DIY buyers need to be educated, because it is, I completely understand a lot of the consumer vitriol toward realtors, especially after so many of them have been screwed in lawsuits. And I think that there's a lot to rightfully be pissed off about. But I also can appreciate the degree of arrogance that comes from many FSBO sellers and potentially DIY home buyers that feel like, well, I don't need any of these people. It's an easy process, and I know what I'm doing. When it's not the most intuitive thing ever, and you are dealing with legal documents that have major financial consequences. And so it is important that if you're going to represent yourself, that you are educated. And of course, I'm trying to build out those resources for people and give as much away as I possibly can in hopes of trying to turn the tide. But I'm curious, you've been in this longer than I have. Where are you seeing the greatest resources for whether buyers or sellers that are wanting to do it themselves? Are you seeing collections of resources to help educate people and help them get through the process well?
Yes and no. Again, so we told people forever that it was free. So like that education of the full process, I think, is really starting to come out now more than ever, especially, from an innovation standpoint, to be totally honest with you. A lot of people looked at that buyer agent commission as just like a guarantee, right? So, everyone's offering it. So why would we make a model that takes less if this is just sitting on the table for us? But right. So now that that's gone away, right? And you don't really know what a seller is going to be offering. And now buyers are really paying attention to what kind of fees they're going to have. I think those resources and the programs and the DIYs or the flat fee or the hourly are really going to start popping up more now because there's no more guarantee. And so there's more initiative now to think outside the box, which we didn't have to do and wasn't welcomed. But now, it's a different story. It's a different industry. So as far as a safe place to go, I don't think there's many. I try to build that as much as I can with selling later, but you have to be so careful where you get your resources from, because there are companies and even mortgage companies that buy up housing blogs. You would never know they own it, but anything information you give them, they're taking that and following you and trying to get you to either they're going to sell your data to an agent, a lender. You have to just be really careful of. I would even say, like, whatever research you are doing, I would make up a fake email and I would make up just like have a Google number that's specifically only for this real estate stuff, because some of these platforms, you will get bombarded with phone calls and emails and solicitations if you end up going to one of them that's really just a trap. So you have to be really, really careful. But I do think that over the next year, it'll get better.
Yeah. I'm glad that, hopefully there is that light at the end of the tunnel in terms of things turning a corner. And that goes back to what you were talking about with referrals, right? Where there's so much of the industry, real estate industry, is referral based, which then of course just adds to end line consumer expenses. But you do have these companies that are frothing at the mouth to get your information so that they can spam it out to.
It's not even just websites. You need to be careful. Like, if you go on, I see this all the time on like the local Facebook groups, and you're like, hey, can someone recommend an agent? And you're going to get 200 plus names coming at you.
Yeah.
And you need to know that some of those people are paid to be in there to like mention someone's specific name sometimes. And so it's just,
Hmm.
I'm excited for this era because I feel like this is going to be like where buyers really start to learn what's been happening and how the industry works, and like start to actually question and interview people they want to work with, regardless of how much they're charging, if it's an agent, if it's DIY, like to really understand and vet who you're working for, because the industry sucks at managing people. They're holding people accountable, making sure people follow the rules. There's over 1 million realtors out there to sell like 4 million homes. We don't need that many. And the
Yeah.
last time I checked, like 75% have not sold a home this year. So, like, who are
Right.
you hiring? Right. And it's regardless of if it's an agent or if it's an attorney, like, it's almost like the due diligence era for home buyers, right? We're learning, we're going to vet who we use, and we're going to have a really good understanding of where your money's going. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, no, I absolutely do too. I got just a couple more questions. One of them kind of circling back, but when we talk about a DIY home buyer and the potential of saving money, that's an area where I've had a lot of agents that have pushed back on
Mhm.
that claim that I make, because sometimes the seller, if it's an unrepresented buyer and the seller has a listing agreement with the agent, that agent might get the full 6% commission that otherwise would have been split 3%, 3% if there was another buyer's agent on the end of the deal. So these agents say, well, you don't actually save any money as a DIY home buyer because the seller is going to pay the same amount of commission. And also, you mentioned as hopefully as things move away from sellers offering any upfront commission and just leave that to be negotiable, it may be a misnomer for me to frame things as saving money. It may be that you're actually just making your offer more attractive because you're asking for less concessions. But I'd just love for you to speak to, all right, in what ways can being a DIY home buyer be financially advantageous compared to hiring an agent?
Sure. So going back to that co-op, right, where they're
Yeah.
sharing one set of commission, that's another positive of the settlement is a lot of contracts removed that. So now they're having a seller sign like, hey, this is what you just pay me to sell your home. And then whether you want to offer something or not to like a buyer agent, which most shouldn't, they should just say negotiate it with your offer. That's kind of where it's headed. There are smaller cities. There's a couple agents in Ohio that recently bragged how like the buyer only needed 2% and we offered 3. So thanks. I got an extra $6,000 because the buyer only needed 2 of it. And I'm like, why would you brag about that? Like,
Yeah.
give it back to your seller? Like, why? Oh, it's just wild. But I think, when it comes to, the co-op part of it and sharing commission, that's going to eventually be phased out, if not already.
Yeah.
And so, go back to your question again, because I'm going to get way off track.
No, no, no. Well, one, I love that you clarified that, and I'm excited for that direction because the
Mhm.
co-op deal is that only benefits agents. There is no way that I can see that benefiting buyer, seller, consumer.
Mhm.
So anyhow, I cannot wait for the day that that's done.
Yeah,
Hopefully, the DOJ.
I mean the California Realtor Association, they got rid of it, but partially that's because the DOJ stepped in and was like, "Hey, I want to see your contracts." Um, and I know that um, people have different opinions of like government involvement and stuff, but like, I've had the opportunity to speak with the DOJ at one point or another, and like, you never know where they're headed.
Yeah,
But I hope that people know that their main goal isn't to like unemploy people or like, what was the one I heard? Oh, they're attacking us because we're a female dominated industry. Like, none of that
Hmm.
is true. None of it is true. They're
Yeah,
looking at why buyer agent commissions haven't changed much. Why is a competitor setting the fee for someone that they're not working with, right? Like they're setting someone else's fee. So working together. And really their main goal is to make sure that they're protecting consumers because this industry has been self-regulated. We have the CFPB to hammer on lenders, to hammer on banking, but somehow the CFPB does not oversee real estate agents, anything of that nature, unless it has to do with the lender relationship. And so this industry has gone unchecked, really, for a very, very, very long time. So what these conversations are needed and the investigations are needed, and it's not a personal attack. And I think you probably get this too. A lot of the times when you and I'm assuming this for you, when I talk about industry issues, unless I'm calling out a specific agent for being a dumbass, it's about the industry. So like the industry is like NAR, the State Licensing Association, brokers, and then agents are way down here. Yeah. The decisions and the direction come from the top. So agents are just a product of what they've been taught, whether they've been taught good, bad, a product of whatever NAR has been feeding to them. And so it's hard when you want to point that stuff out. I'm sure you get it. People think you're just attacking them as an agent, but it's a much bigger problem. It's a much bigger problem. Look at me. I went off on a tangent again. I told you I could talk about this crap forever because it's
I'm into it. No. These tangents
and it's so hard. Because you ask me a question and I'm like, got to mention this, got to mention this, got to mention this.
No. Well, there's just so much here and to talk about, which is why I'm so grateful for all the content and things that you are creating. Because and part of why there's so much to talk about is because these things have been happening for so long, but they have gone unaddressed. The consumer is unaware, and so it's just kind of like, oh man, if I got a shot to tell people what they need to know to make informed decisions as they transact real estate, like I want them to hear all of this.
Right. Exactly. I think there's a place for everybody. I think if you need help, great, hire help. If you can handle it on your own, go out on your own. Just make sure like you at least have an attorney or you know what you're doing. Yeah. Because what you don't want to do is like screw it up. And now you have like a $400,000 home that you can't afford, or the floor is falling through and you don't have the money to fix it, or, if you can be educated, go for it. If you don't want to deal with it, then hire someone, but don't ever let someone pressure you into doing one way or another, because it's not a one size fits all industry.
Yeah.
They used to tell you it was, but it's not.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that is what we're trying to get past, is that for so long, 40 plus years now, it has felt like a one size fits all, that the only way to successfully buy a home is to hire an agent, a buyer's agent, and you're not even hiring them because they're free. Well, the final question that I have for you here is just, and this is, I apologize that I'm just totally, putting you on the spot, but with, I'm curious, like if Wendy ruled the world and got to set up the real estate industry the way it ought to be, I'm just curious, like how would real estate transactions look? What would you do in terms of like, should buyer agents be flat fee or hourly? Should it be commission based? What are some of the key changes you would make to the industry that you just think, all right, this is what a healthy industry would look like from a consumer perspective?
The MLS system has got to change. So most people probably don't know this. So like there are over 500 multi-list services in the US. The majority are owned by realtor associations or brokers. Okay. There used to be like 800. There really should only be like one per state. You don't need 500 some, and consumers should have a better seat at the table to be able to go on there, look through information, maybe, not have the access code to get into the home. There's obviously some security issues, but, the data systems have been built up by realtor associations that then get fed to Zillows and realtor.com. So know that like Zillow's not going to be able to take over because their data feeds are coming from the MLSs. Because people are always like, oh, I'll just use Zillow. And I'm like, that Zillow is getting their info from the data feeds that realtors are using. So I think streamlining the MLS, separating them from the realtor associations, and just legitimately being one system for everybody is number one. appraisers need that data, but consumers should also be able to go on there without having to have their data sold or be pushed to an agent, have that freedom. Yep. Two, I think it's important that we have different value structures for agents if you want to use one, whether it's hourly, whether it's a flat fee, and embracing all of those different models instead of making anyone that's charging less than 2%. What's the word? They're a discounter.
Discount broker. Yeah.
Pay for. And it's like, maybe some people don't need their handheld, right? Yeah. So like, it's okay for some people. Just embracing that everybody should have an option. It doesn't have to be everyone's charging the same thing or similar. I did a video about in Minnesota, how there was a brokerage. Every single one of their properties, except one, was offering 2.5% to 2.7% commission to the buy side. And I'm like, there's no way mathematically that a seller would decide that number on their own unless you told them, or which is really stupid to do after you just got sued for doing that. Right. But, number three, we need a regulatory system outside of even the state commissions, because consumers should know that each state has like a real estate commission board, right? And it's mostly filled with realtors or businesses that work with realtors. And sometimes there's one or two government people. And then there's supposed to be consumer seats. But in my state, there has been an empty consumer seat for like 3 years. Wow. So these people oversee like the licensing and the real estate laws. But what you'll notice with NAR is that they have their hands in everything. Every housing nonprofit you can think of, they're in there. Every state commission board, they're in there. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Like, who's running the show? So I do think if it's not going to be a CFPB branch, like there should be some sort of organization that is really overseeing things, that isn't a realtor, that understands real estate laws, but like doesn't have that connection, right? There has to be a more independent oversight of this whole thing, because right now it's been, again, self-run, self-regulated, and this is where we are now, right? Yeah. What else? We talked about MLSs, variety of commissions. Right, last one, contracts. Okay.
Yeah.
Some states, very few, offer a public contract that you can use when you are buying a home, right? The for sale contract or the point of sale contract. Other states don't give you shit. There's nothing available. You can go on U.S. legal forms. I have no idea if those are legitimate.
Right.
But every realtor association has all those forms, and you can't get access to them, right? They're copywritten. You're not even the buyer agreements. Like the one in my state, good luck finding a copy of it before you go work with someone, because it's hidden behind info walls and membership walls. So I think every state should have some sort of consumer-friendly form for buyers, for sellers, and for the whole point of sale contract to follow. And I brought that up to my state of Pennsylvania, and they told me it wasn't their job. So I don't expect that coming from my state, but hopefully a few other ones that don't offer it could consider going that route, because I think that's a big part of it, the forms and understanding what's on them. Like, what can I expect? Because you don't have access to them. So how are you supposed to know what you're signing and what you need to understand if you don't have anything to look at or to preview, to study, right? I could go on forever. I think companies need to disclose if they're making referral fees off your data. Because if you go on Zillow and they connect you to an agent and that agent's paying Zillow 40%, what do you think that's going to do to your negotiation power if you decide to use an agent? And they will follow you for 2 years. So even if you're buying and selling and you use that same agent, they will pay twice. They will pay 40% of the listing commission they made and 40% of the buyer commission. In most markets, some of them, they have different pricing models. I could bitch about this industry forever. What else? I think those are the key ones. I didn't know you were going to ask me that. I probably have better answers.
You did an amazing job just with me putting you on the spot. I love all 5 of those. And I think that I completely agree. Like, I don't understand why each state doesn't run its own MLS and why each state doesn't have its own standardized purchase and sale agreement forms that are available to the consumer.
No,
I do understand why because it's not what's most financially advantageous to NAR and brokerages.
Why they join, right? I mean, some agents have no choice. They have to join the MLS and they have to join the Realtor Association, or it comes in a pair, right?
Yeah.
And that, I think that's part of it. And there's one place in Georgia where 3 MLSs overlap. And there's like, I don't know how many miles it is, where all 3 cover. So you almost have to pay to be in all 3 MLSs because it's like a 40-minute drive. And it's like, that's absurd that an agent would have to join 3 MLSs, multiple realtor association groups, just to put the home up for sale, to make sure that everybody sees it. Like, it's just it doesn't need to be that complicated. But I went to an MLS conference and told them, like, you need to separate from NAR. Like, I don't think we need this many of you. And they just don't. I think some of them see the writing on the wall, but some of them have their head in the sand. Like, people have been saying MLSs are going to go out of business for years, and it never has. And I'm like, things are different. Things are much different now. So I don't know, but it's concerned. I mean, but that holds a lot of data. So we need that data, but like, who should be in charge of it?
Yeah. No, it kind of feels like the old Blockbuster, nobody's ever going to move over entirely to streaming services. Everybody's going to want their DVDs. And, before you know it, the change comes rapidly. Obviously, there's some pretty significant differences with the MLS, but.
Right. Well, I think that lawsuit was the biggest. I can tell you that nobody thought that lawsuit would go through. Again, like, it's a private lawsuit. The DOJ and NAR have their own separate legal battle that's been going on for 4 years, 5 years. I don't remember. But this private lawsuit, of the 3 of them that were filed in the beginning, no one took them seriously. I don't think anyone thought they had any legs, maybe except for Rob Hahn. He's the only one that I've seen with past history that's like, hey, this is coming, like, you're in trouble. And now I think there's like 20 or 30 lawsuits that ended up coming out. But even up until that, when the jury came back and basically found these people guilty of price fixing, they went into this like settlement discussion. But what I'm surprised about is that NAR was telling to their members, we're going to fight this and we're going to win. But at that same time, they were behind closed doors negotiating a settlement with the lawyers. And it's like, should you have just been more honest with people about what's happening? Because I think that agents feel like they kind of got screwed over, which by NAR, I don't think NAR communicated correctly to them how serious this was, or like, hey, your practices aren't really great. But so I feel bad for agents in that respect, because I don't think they realize some of them are just, they don't want to embrace it. And some of them still think that they're going to keep doing what they did. And if you interview an agent that tells you like anything that used to happen still happens, find someone else. Find someone who really understands how this world looks like post-settlement, because it's much different. Yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy how many agents I hear that say, nothing's really changed.
And I have to say, there's a group of agents, and again, like this, I know this is a DIY podcast, but I think it's really important to say, like, there are agents out there that are saying, well, if my buyer can't get an answer on what commission's being offered, they don't want to see it.
Yeah.
Like, don't use an agent like that, because this market is shifting into sellers are open to paying to compensate buyers, not the buyer's agent, for some of their costs. So just ask for it in your offer instead of a seller putting a number out there that they maybe didn't need to do. So, so just be cautious of how you're being advised.
Yeah.
Some people aren't embracing this and leading you the wrong way.
And I know we're running short. I got one more question that came to mind that's tied to that. You got a couple more minutes?
I mean, you're going to have to edit out so much of my rambling anyways.
No, I'm not editing a thing. This is great. I love it. So with that, there have been a number of buyers that unscrupulous agents have used the new changes to their own advantage, and they've gotten buyers to sign a 6-month term covering a massive geographic area on an exclusive agency at 3%. And trusting buyers said, okay, I guess this is just what it is now. And now they're, 60 days into that 6-month agreement. And they're like, I hate working with this person. They're not
Mhm.
doing their job for me. I didn't understand what it was that I signed. Um, I'm sure you've probably run into some of that. What does it look like for buyers to get out of those agreements? Like if a buyer has signed an agreement and then they find exactly what you said, like, I think my agent is steering me away from properties and I don't think that they have my best interest at hearts. Are buyers screwed in that position or is there an out?
So again, pre-settlement, the contracts were like garbage, right? So most of them would say, sure, you can cancel as long as we both agree to it. And what was going to happen is, because your contract's really with the broker, it's not with the real estate agent, the broker would be like, I'll just find you someone else. But in my thought process, like I would want a clean break. And so you have to, like, I'm not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice, but the new contracts are much more clear. And a lot of them give you the opportunity to, in writing, say you want to cancel and be able to terminate it. But you really have to look at that termination clause before you sign something. But I will say, if you are just meeting an agent for the first time, write it in that this agreement only applies to this specific address. Because we've noticed a few attorneys that actually have reviewed these contracts. Tanya is one of them. She's a professor of law at Buffalo University or University of Buffalo. I'm sorry, Tanya, I forgot which way it goes. And the nice thing is, even though it says like county or like geography, you can still just write in an address. They're not going to like say you can do that, but you can certainly say, hey, I'll sign this for this property, but I don't really want to commit to you. I would not sign anything you could even sign it for 7 days. Be like, hey, let's take a week. If I like you, you can always sign another contract. But if I don't, I want a clean break. Yep. So, but more than anything, like go to the agent first and be like, I'm not happy. I don't like this relationship. If they don't get back to you, go to the broker because that's who your contract's with. And if they give you pushback and they still won't let you go, I shouldn't say this. Public reviews, bad ones are like the Achilles heel to brokerages. I would leave a review. Like, I'm not happy with them, but I'm stuck in my contract. As long as it's valid how you feel, I think, that public pressure will help you. But just make sure whatever you're signing, you don't have some kind of termination fee. Like you really have to read these things before you sign them. You really do. But just double check. But just keep pushing. And when all else fails, you can get an attorney to write you a letter that says they want out. We don't feel like we're being serviced correctly. We have concerns of steering, whatever the fears are, and go that route. But the two things you'll want to look for when you sign something is termination and protection period. So protection period is like 30 days after this contract's canceled. If you buy a home that we showed you, you're going to pay us commission. So like be very, very, very aware of those kind of things.
Yeah. That's super helpful. I really appreciate you tackling that question. And this whole conversation, I've loved it. I know that we could go another couple of hours.
I feel bad. Every time you ask me a question, like there's 30 things that pop into my head and I get through 5 of them and I'm like, oh shit, I forgot what he asked me. It's so hard to kind of explain this 100-year-old system in this 30 or 40-year battle with the DOJ and how it all blew up, right? It's a very long thing, but I think if your readers are interested in this history, like we have some stuff on Selling Later, we have Rob Hahn has a ton of good articles about the history of how we got here, things you should look out for, and then Tanya Monaster, the attorney I was talking about, has put out a lot of great stuff about contracts because she's a contract law professor. So she's another good person to kind of tap into.
Well, I'll definitely, listeners, there's a link in the description to Selling Later so that you can find all of Wendy's information. And then Wendy, anything that you want to send me in terms of the articles that you've mentioned, I'm happy to include those links as well. Yeah. And then we connected initially off of TikTok, which is something I never thought that I would say, that I'd make a valuable connection off of.
every co-host on my podcast, I am always like, oh, it's another TikTok friend. I was like, do I have in real life friends? Because it doesn't feel like it sometimes.
It's so funny, this brave new world that we live in. But I mentioned that because your content on there is amazing. Just these 30-second to 2-minute digestible nuggets highlighting in real time the things that you're coming across. And so I do highly encourage all of our listeners to connect with you there and on all the other social media platforms, which is at later Wendy is your handle for all of those, right? And I'll include links in the show notes to your social media platforms. But I really appreciate all the valuable content that you're creating and everything that you've shared here, because there is so much to talk about and because there's so much that's going to be unfolding over the next year plus. Would love to stay in contact, and as big developments come, would love to have you back on to talk about some of those.
Anytime. I'll be more prepared to explain lawsuits.
Hey, I didn't give you much. It was like, hey, do you mind just showing up, turning on your camera and talking? And this has been just so much valuable insight. So really appreciate you, listeners. Thank you so much for engaging with us. Anything that you found valuable here, please do share it with others, because the more that we can get this message out for consumer protection, the quicker we can bring about positive changes within the industry. And you listeners are a huge part of that. So do share it. Make sure that you've subscribed, whatever platform you're on, if that's liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing. Just grateful for any sort of engagement there. Also, check out those show notes. Do connect with Wendy, because it'll be the best follow make this week.
I promise I'm really nice, and I can my emails are a lot shorter than my podcast answers, so I'll be able to direct you much better to explain stuff.
Perfect. Unless you're a realtor, then maybe don't follow either of us.
Gotta say, like, I have made some really good. There are a handful of realtors who are like excited about these changes, excited for people to leave the industry. They're just not as public about it because they know what will happen. Like if they say that stuff out loud, like you're not really not allowed to say bad things about. I can, because I'm not one of them, but they're not allowed to. So,
well, and right, I am one of them, and yet still have to kind of keep my head low at this point in time, because I got a massive target on my back otherwise. But
welcome to the group. There's a whole circle of us.
Thank you. Yes, connect me with all your good people. All right. Thank you so much.